So for the test, now that you watched the video, I want that you remember that Lamarck actually studied medicine, and this was very important because he applied this anatomical understanding and classifications to biology, because later he was an assistant to this wonderful museum, and I want to remind you that he was living in an empire at that time. So in the empire, with multiple colonies, all these people that he was traveling all over the world, they was bringing in different animals, and he was able to study all of them and think about different in a different way, trying to see all this diversity. So remember, he studied medicine. He was able to see a huge diversity of animals, and in particular, he did something that it was not very popular, that he was study invertebrates, and he was the founder of invertebrate paleontology. And I'll just remind you that he was working in a museum with thousands of samples in one of the giant metropolis at that time, so he was able to study something very interesting, that it was animal adaptation. And I will show you in a second why this is important. So he was a professor of zoology, and he studied invertebrates. And after seeing all these samples, he concluded that plants and animals change their forms to adapt to their environment, and they're able to pass their traits to their offspring. So let me show you some example of what Lamarck could have probably seen. So he was seeing animals that they were very weird. So for example, in the ocean you have these vampire squid that live in ocean depths that possibly nobody else have seen it, and he was able to collect samples like this one. For example, he also observed these very weird organisms. What do you think? Is this a plant or an animal? And maybe you guessed that it's an animal, although it doesn't move. And he was constantly seeing these very weird organisms and tried to explain how they change. And these are more examples of weird animals. This one looked more like a Pokemon than a real animal, but it's actually real. And this one is an animal that is able to do photosynthesis. I know plants are the ones that are able to do photosynthesis, but this is just a weird animal that is able to do photosynthesis. So he's studying all this diversity. And I show you this so you think like Lamarck. What is happening? How all this diversity appear? And I'm going to show you a piece of a TED talk that talk about that, about this diversity.
To shallow water now and look at some creatures that are positively amazing. The cephalopods, headfoots. As a kid, I knew them as calamari mostly, but this is an octopus. This is the work of Dr. Roger Hanlon at the Marine Biological Lab. And just fascinating how cephalopods can, with their eyes, incredible eyes, sense their surrounding, look at light, look at patterns. Here's an octopus moving across the reef, finds a spot to settle down, curls up, and then disappears into the background. Tough thing to do. In the next bit, we're going to see a couple of squid. These are squid. Now, males, when they fight, if they're really aggressive, they turn white. And these two males are fighting. They do it by bouncing their butts together, which is an interesting concept. Now, here's a male on the left and a female on the right. And now the male has managed to split his coloration so that the female only always sees the kinder, gentler squid in him. And the male's on the outside. We're going to see it again. Let's take a look at it again. Watch the coloration. White on the right, brown on the left. He takes a step back. So he's keeping off the other males by splitting his body, and he comes up on the other side. Bingo. Now, I'm told that's not just a squid phenomenon with males, but I don't know if that's it. Cuttlefish. I love cuttlefish. This is a giant Australian cuttlefish, and there he is, his droopy little eyes up here. But they could do pretty amazing things too. Here we're going to see one backing into a crevice, and watch his tentacles. He just pulls them in, makes them look just like algae. Disappears right into the background. Positively amazing. Here's two males fighting. Once again, they're smart enough, these cephalopods, they know not to hurt each other, but look at the patterns that they can do with their skin. Okay? Just an amazing thing. Here's an octopus. Sometimes they don't want to be seen when they move because predators can see them. And here's this guy actually can make himself look like a rock, and looking at his environment can actually slide across the bottom using the waves and the shadows so he can't be seen. His motion blends right into the background. the moving rock trick. So we're learning lots new from the shallow water, still exploring that deep, learning lots from the shallow water. There's a good reason why. I mean, the shallow water is full of predators. Here's a barracuda. And if you're an octopus or a cephalopod, you need to really understand how to use your surroundings to hide. In the next scene, you're going to see a nice coral bottom. And you see that an octopus would stand out very easily there if you couldn't use your camouflage, use your skin to change color and texture. Here's some algae in the foreground and an octopus. Isn't that amazing? Now, Roger spooked him, so he took off, a cloud of ink, lands, and when he lands, the octopus says, "Look, I've been seen, best thing to do is get as big as I can get." That big brown makes his eye spot very big, so he's bluffing. Let's do it backwards. I thought he was joking when he first showed it to me. I thought it was all graphics. So here it is in reverse. Watch the skin color, watch the skin texture. Just an amazing animal, can change color and texture to match the surroundings. Watch him blend right into this algae. 1, 2, 3. And now he's gone, and so am I. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.
So I want that you remember these three main ideas. And the first one is that he considered that a species change over time. So as he worked in a museum, he was able to have an early evolutionary approach. So imagine this. Everybody used to see butterflies in France, but he can have a more complete approach. He can have a different view because as he worked in the museum, he was able to collect samples from all over the world. And well, these butterflies from here, they have 2 eye spots, 1 and 2. This one also have 2 eye spots, but this one, the eye spot is bigger. And he was able to see that other butterflies of other parts of the world, they have multiple eye spots. In our case, there are ones that are missing the eye spot, but they keep the white spot. And there is so much diversity. So he was able to organize them and think that a species change over time. And not only that they could be a progression. And a progression toward complexity or toward perfection. So let me talk more about the second one. So as I said, he thought that there was a progression, and when he started analyzing different animals of the sea, so for example, he saw that there was definitely a progression from simple organisms to more complex organisms, as we watch in the video, that they were able to have very cool adaptations. So that was the first one, was that the species change over time, and the second one, that there was a progression toward perfection, toward complexity. And finally, the third idea that I want that you remember is the law of the use and disuse that we already talked about it, and the classical example of the giraffe. And in this case, if you see, the change is directed by organism needs. So if the giraffe need to eat plants that are on the top of a tree, they are going to extend and extend their neck. I might ask you something about invertebrate zoology. What was the contributions of Lamarck in this field? And remember that all these animals don't have backbones. So he published a book called Natural History of Animals Without Backbones. And remember that as we watch in the small lecture, few naturalists considered that they were worthy to study. And finally, he not only invented the word invertebrate, but he developed a classification of different invertebrates. Now I'm going to talk about the legacy of Lamarck. And first, I'm going to talk about how Lamarck influenced Darwin. And then I will talk about how the environment influenced genes. That is an idea that is important and that is a legacy of Lamarck. So, although we generally think that Lamarck was wrong and Darwin was right, this is actually not a real conception, is not actually what happened. What happened is that Lamarck has a huge influence on Darwin and the ideas of Darwin, the theory of evolution through natural selection. It was He came up with this idea after reading a lot of information, and one of the major keys of information was Lamarck. So Darwin took many Lamarck's ideas into account when he came up with his evolution through natural selection. So remember, it's not that he was wrong and this one was right. As we will talk, they have many ideas in common. And now, in our in the present and in the future, there is a renaissance in terms of the outlook of Lamarck. There is a field called epigenetics that is on top of genetics, and what we are finding is different evidence that the environment is more important than we thought before and can also interact with genes. So the phenotype not only depend on genes but depend on the environment. And we will talk a little bit about twins and about how epigenetics, how there are factors that can affect how DNA work. And in particular, as I said, we will talk about epigenetics. So remember, in the modern day, there is a renaissance on the Lamarckist perspective, in particular in genetics. We are talking more about environments, and we will talk about this important idea of epigenetics. Okay, I hope that you enjoyed this class, and if you have any doubt, just send me an email and we will be in contact. Have a good day. Bye.